All right, good morning, everyone. We're back. We're live from the ASB Financial Studios in Fly on the Wall Productions. It is another humid morning, 80 degrees already right now in central Vermont. At least that's the temperature that we're showing here on North Main Street. It is going to be another scorcher and possibly some pretty wicked weather moving in at parts of the day today, and we're watching that carefully as well. We will certainly let you know what we have in store from the weatherman himself, Roger Hill. Rory Thibault is sitting right next to me. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing great. How about you?
So glad to have you here. Thank you so much for being here. Raylene, if you would do us a favor here. We have a camera that is just decided to quit on us. If you would just run Rory maybe, or run this new camera right here. Just point that right toward Rory. We've had some tech issues in here for a while now, and we're not sure exactly what it is. We got the other night during the Barry beat. We had that's perfect right there. I think that's going to work. We'll just straighten it. Raylene, if you could just straighten it out just a little bit, would be great. Yeah, we during the that's good right there. That's good right there. Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. During the Barry beat the other night, we had that storm that came through and seemed to possibly interrupt some of our equipment. So we've been having some last second snafus here. So thanks for bearing with us. Good morning, my friend. How are you? How are you doing?
I'm doing well, but tired. Between working a full-time job and campaigning full-time, doesn't leave time for much else.
Sure. What was the routine like before you started running for Attorney General? Which was, I remember when we had you on, it was crazy.
Well, it was a little more relaxed. Usually mornings up on the farm feeding animals and getting coffee with my friend up there in Cabot, and
Yeah.
now that's a much more abbreviated time, and then hitting the car, and then coming to work, taking care of things, and then usually as soon as the whistle blows, I'm
Right.
out doing events.
Yes. So now that you're running for AG, this is a little bit more cram-packed, and I'm not sure how you're doing it. Alfonso was in here saying he doesn't have a clue how you're doing it. And Bridget says the same thing. I mean, you're just how are you doing it? What's it like now?
Having 4 different calendars, and then a fantastic wife and supportive family at home. I mean, that's really the only way you can get through it. And then having a great team, So I'm glad you had a chance to talk with Alfonso and Bridget, and
Yeah.
and the people behind the scenes, my victim advocates and the admins are also doing an incredible job up there. But first and foremost, I mean, the campaign is something for me, but my first duty is to the county and doing the job and the work here and
Right.
taking care of the team.
Number one. Interesting. I'm guessing that you've got to delegate now more than you ever have before.
Yeah, so I think Bridget's getting a good taste of doing some of those intakes and whatnot, and my routine had traditionally been to take home some work of the easy stuff I could do without the support of the office, and
Yes.
I'm spreading out a little bit more of that love to everyone else, but my team has been great and really supportive of helping pick up some of the slack.
You just got a chance to mingle with some folks in Warren, a little house gathering over there. You got to meet some folks out in the Mad River Valley. What was that like?
It was great, and I will say this, the best part of campaigning is doing the events where you get to meet people, whether it's parades or house parties, and small conversations are good, and I think really informative of not what we're, reading just about in Vermont Digger in 7 days, but what you're hearing from actual Vermonters.
Sure.
And sometimes it goes directly into what the AG does. Other times it's, broader issues that are just, I think things we're all thinking about, whether it's rising costs or, educational quality, workforce development. application of marijuana laws. I've met like multiple farmers, about what that process is looking like and how, the retail market's coming together. And, everyone has a different story to tell. And to me, that's been the most rewarding part, whether I'm in Bennington or Brattleboro or, up in St. Albans, just hearing the things that people have in common and the things and different perspectives they have.
I remember asking you the last time we had you in here, were you concerned about marijuana with pot shops, for lack of a better term, the retail industry, the retail market popping up? We've already got several in Vermont that are in queue to go. Are you concerned about that? And is your office concerned about that? How are you responding to that when you meet folks at house parties and such, and out on the sidewalk and social media that say, "Whoa, we've got a whole new wave that's coming"?
Yeah, so, we can look around other states. So Massachusetts is now well ahead of us. Yep. And, there's lessons to be learned from places like Massachusetts, Colorado, and Oregon.
Yep.
And, the biggest takeaway I'm hearing from the farmers and producers who are looking to go into the retail market or establish that here is just being worried that a regulatory regime that's too restrictive is going to keep the gray and black market thriving.
Sure.
And, I think we're at a threshold where we want to, the state's decided it's going to be legal. We want to monetize that, regulate it appropriately, but not to the point where people bypass that. And ultimately, this is an economic, hopefully an economic boon for Vermont of some additional revenue to help do things that are important in the state, whether it's education or what have you. From a public safety standpoint, I don't think that just because it's in a retail market that we're suddenly going to have a new wave of people using cannabis products. I think people who are already using are going to continue to do so. And, the best thing is just to encourage responsible use, making sure, not to drive immediately afterwards and,
Sure.
and to just treat it in the same way you treat, say, using alcohol.
Yeah. Do you think would you like to see more drug recognition experts in our police force here in the state of Vermont?
Yeah, I think it's really useful, and I say that because having just one or two in an area means you're at the mercy of, is someone on shift and can they respond? So having that expertise in every single department would be helpful, and likewise making sure someone's always available would also be helpful, because frequently I think a greater mix of our cases are DUI drug, not just alcohol,
and not just marijuana, but opioids.
Yeah, I know that's actually typically opiates or sometimes cocaine, and that can also contribute to erratic and dangerous driving. And we're no stranger here, and whether in treatment court or just the day-to-day arraignments of sometimes there are people who nod off while driving after use, and it's not only danger to others but really danger to themselves. And making sure we have quality investigations means, one, we can keep roads safe, and then two, if someone has a treatment need, we can help try to align them with taking care of a problem before they themselves or others are at risk.
For you, if you go up 40,000 feet, look down, the big ticket items, domestic, opioids, and drug use in general, what are the biggest things that you would like to get more of a grasp on as Attorney General? Where do you think our biggest problems in the state of Vermont lie?
Yeah, so you really hit the nail on the head by referencing domestic and intimate partner violence, and also the continuation of opiate epidemics. So I think two things. One, we need to have plans to actually deal with this. It's no secret that heroin, and now mostly fentanyl, comes in from places like New York and Massachusetts. On the flip side of that, Vermont has a permissive. We have a lot of guns, and a lot of those guns get traded for drugs and then go south where they're used in violent crimes or used, to trade for, other bad things. So when I look at what the role of the Attorney General is, there's a very small criminal division, but leadership and coming up with a plan and a strategy can be there. Now, anytime we're talking about, drug policy and strategy, I think it also, there's two sides of it. We want to hold traffickers accountable and cut down on the flow, but we also need to make sure that that conversation involves implementing harm reduction strategies for people who are who are using. And then, when intimate partner violence, I think that goes right into, the risk of gun violence. And we're watching what's happened in other states of schools being attacked, repeatedly. And it's probably only a matter of time until Vermont has to have a reckoning with, a gun violence incident in a public setting. And, that requires a lot of coordination, a lot of hard work, and a lot of tough decisions about how best to mitigate the risk of an event like that happening here.
You've got to be, even though you're so busy campaigning and everything that you're doing right now, you've got to be paying attention to what's going on in Texas. We need to tighten the belt a little bit. We need to make sure that where our children are, and fair to say, there may be no greater priority for any of us than our children. That they need to be safe more than anything else in a building that can't be penetrated. I'm sure that's got you. This all has your attention.
It does, and. So going back in time, almost 5 years ago now, there was an incident in Fairhaven here in Vermont with, thankfully nothing ended up happening, but, there was the threat. And
I remember well.
And in response to that, the legislature and the governor convened the Community Violence Prevention Task Force, and I was really proud to be one of the members on that. But, the whole premise of that study was tough because it was looking at three different aspects. First was, prevention. The next was response, assuming something will happen, and then recovery. And, each of those three steps was really taking a look at, how can you try to prevent gun violence? What do you do in an active shooter situation, whether it's at a school or a hospital or some other public setting? And then after something happens, how do you recover from that? How do you make a community whole again? How do you, begin the process of repairing the harm? And, that was a grim subject matter to go through. But what it did show me is that we do have some incredibly bright people in Vermont who continue to be focused on the issue. But I think that just underscores that we need to be proactive and, continually questioning. Are we doing enough when it comes to law enforcement training? Do we have enough, law enforcement? And a big concern I have living in a rural community is response time. It can sometimes take 30 to 45 minutes to get a state trooper out to a place like Cabot or, down to a small community like Roxbury. That's the reality. And as we see, challenges with law enforcement staffing around the state, we're asking, less people in uniform to sometimes do more and to cover a broader area than they might have in the past.
That's right. And we don't live in a big state like Texas. We don't have 400 police officers that are going to show up at a school.
Right. And so that means it's really important to make sure that who does respond has the equipment, training, and wherewithal to know how to best, respond in that situation. And, I think that our state police barracks has done a fantastic job of working with school leaders to understand the layouts of schools, to know, where to go, to know who to contact. And that's something that I think needs to be continually reinforced, not just, in this county, but throughout the state, to make sure that those connections are made. And, unfortunately, we can't just create fortresses out of schools.
Right.
But we need to do everything we can to, I think, focus on that prevention and mitigation first.
We had Alfonso in here. He was wonderful, speaking about treatment court, among many other things. I had a great conversation with him. I hope he'll come back. This guy is he's one of your key players.
He is, yeah. And, I would say everyone is a key player in the office. That's the benefit of being a small office.
Right.
And part of my management strategy has been to really try to give the deputies a lot of discretion to resolve cases and to take ownership over something. So Alfonso has done a fantastic job of really taking ownership of our office's involvement in treatment court.
Yeah.
He's also there and present for law enforcement with counter drug work.
Sure.
And just as much Bridget is our leader on dealing with our house and the special investigative unit. Tim Leaders Dumont is now, is, as you may know, is running in primary down in Addison County to be a state's attorney down there. And while he's young, he's brought a great deal of enthusiasm to the office and doing a lot of work with our post-conviction relief cases and, doing a lot with our driving docket and with our court diversion program. So it's building relationships. So that's something that he's been entrusted with. Of course, we have Kristen Ghazi, who deals with our juvenile docket. And, one of the things I think that flies under the radar, Washington County for years and years and years has been a leader in juvenile justice reform and, being on the cutting edge of doing good work in unison with DCF. And that's so much in part because of the expertise that Kristen has, and I think her willingness to try new things and to be a cooperative leader in that community. So, I really have a team of all-stars, and that's what makes this a successful office.
And we can't forget about Holly. Come on now.
I didn't even get to the victim advocates. And so Holly and Melissa are, integral to communicating with victims, and that's something that, I'll flip this to the Attorney General's office for a moment. Right now, there's only one, victim advocate in the criminal division, but there are a lot of other areas in which victims may need services. So if I am Attorney General, I hope to create a little bit larger client services and victim services, division, thinking maybe 2 to 3 people would be better to help, people navigate who are going through a process with the Civil Rights Division or the Consumer Rights Division, or even civil, because there are victims in civil cases. Same thing with environmental enforcement. There are people who are impacted by that who need to be informed of what's going on. So, the victim advocates are usually the face of the office for so many people.
Sure.
And, their work is incredible. And then I can't end without this. So we have our admins as well. We just had one leave. She was poached by the judiciary because they offered to pay more again, but that's okay. But we still have Liz and Sue, who have been there, for years. And, they've served under Terry Trono, under Craig Nolan, under Tom Kelly, under Scott Williams, and now under me. So the institutional knowledge that they carry and the dedication to this community is unparalleled.
Yeah. What I'm hearing from you, this seems like this is part of your design to be, and a couple of the big words that you're hanging your hat on with this campaign is a holistic approach and a proactive approach. That's really what you're driving for, and it seems like you almost feel like you've got a lot of this figured out, and you just are excited and want to just put it into play.
Yeah, well, so it's easier to do that in a county where you're only dealing with, an hour of driving one direction or the other. But,
True.
Going around the state and campaigning, I definitely heard and believe it, that there are people in places, the corners of the state who feel like their statewide leaders don't always get there, or they only really hear and see from people during, election time.
Yeah.
And, when you talk about being proactive and a holistic approach, it's really all centered on people. It's knowing the people you're serving, knowing what the issues are. And I think addressing things before they get out of control or too big.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's, setting your eyes on a state agency and maybe giving advice that if you keep doing this, we're going to get sued. We need to stop.
Right.
And that might just come from a casual conversation at a grocery store with a constituent to say, hey, did you know that this is going on? So being proactive and holistic, I think, at the larger level of the AG's office means just maintaining as deep of a connection as possible to small communities across Vermont.
Yeah. Small state, but some really serious issues, and some, respectfully, that may have been neglected somewhat, that really need to be brought to the forefront and dealt with more aggressively, more proactively.
Yeah.
Charity Clark. Let's talk. First of all, you had your Digger debate. You had your VPR debate last night. How did things go?
I think really well, and they're both late. And I joked the other day, last weekend at an event, that there's other statewide candidates that got introduced, and then of course the AG candidates went last for this forum, and I said that we are the last but not least race. I think we're down near the bottom of the ballot, and it was the last race to open up with, an incumbent leaving. So
Right.
It's been a sprint, not a marathon. And with that, our debates are also then, later. I think the congressional candidates, the lieutenant governor candidates have been, I think they even had some of their debates before there was even an attorney general race. So, now we're sort of in the second half of our sprint, and
Right.
we're getting to debates. So, it was good to have the forum and opportunity to really express a vision for the office and then talk about some substantive issues.
Charities has a different vision of maybe how proactive we should be, respectfully.
Yeah, I think that's one area where we have a difference. So we're both Democrats. We have a lot of similarities in policy, but it's what do you do with the power of the office? And So there's kind of two parts of the AG's office. There's the day-to-day work of defending the state or participating in lawsuits where the state's a party. I think that's fairly nonpartisan. It's just putting forth, your best foot and doing what needs to be done to get to good resolutions in a case. The flip side of that is then with the one everyone always wants to talk about, and the more interesting end, which is what do you do on policy? And it's a stat that I've told a lot of people. I think this past legislative session, there were 92 study committees called for by the legislature. And so that's basically tasking different executive branch offices or different stakeholder groups to come back next year with either proposals or do some homework to make better decisions. And between those study committees, between the rule committees around court, between things like sentencing commission and other boards, the Attorney General gets to designate and select people to go to each one of those. And, all the study committees, anyone that has anything to do with the law, there's usually an Attorney General rep there. That's really where the soft power and I think ability to be proactive really comes into play. And under Attorney General Donovan, my experience was a lot of the Assistant Attorney Generals or representatives there, they could participate, but they couldn't bind the office or make decisions. And, as we talked about before, my philosophy with my deputies right now, I really want to give, some very broad principles of what our goals are, what our priorities are, and trust them to go and do that. And I think that use of soft power is best used when people are trusted, when they're delegated the decision-making authority to really put forth, decisive action and good decisions.
Question that's just come in. One of the biggest problems with government is transparency. How will you handle public records requests?
Yeah, so this is one area in which the Attorney General's office has been, I think, criticized significantly in the last few years. And there's been a lot of big ticket cases people are interested in, whether it's the EB-5 scandal or some of the officer-involved shootings in those reviews. I think one thing that's important when looking at really large state agencies, they typically have a public records officer or some equivalent. I use a little bit different vernacular sometimes from, having worked through the federal government and in the military prior to returning to Vermont. I think I like the idea of having what I'd call a chief information officer, which is, somebody who is specifically tasked to promote transparency in the office.
We also have a question this morning that says, during the Digger debate, you expressed your desire to be more present, involved at a greater level with cases and the overall operation of the office. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so if I recall correctly, I think that question might have come up and I have to apologize, we also had a Windsor County debate that was just, a local one. So some of those questions have kind of merged together. It's been in the last, 7 days there was 3 debates. So there's been some discussion about whether the Attorney General, him or herself, would go to court. And I think there are certain cases where the public deserves and I think expects the state's top attorney to make an appearance. And, I think about that where there's a fundamental right or something huge at stake that is, an issue that everyone deeply cares about. And, if I recall correctly, I think when Jeff Amestoy was the Attorney General, he would do a few appeals a year. Bill Sorrell definitely had a record of, appearing before the Supreme Court. And, I have a passion for the law and practicing, and, I'd hope to be part of that. And obviously there's a lot of experts and people who could probably do better on certain issues, but, but I think I can bring something to the table as well. And, I'd want to be part of that process of working with the other attorneys there to put the best case forward. And, if there's circumstances where I got to appear and do it, that would be fantastic. And, I kind of goes back to my military ethic, which is, an old adage for, officers in leadership positions. You never ask a soldier to do a task that you wouldn't do yourself.
Of course. You were JAG for the Army. What is that?
Yeah, so, JAG, or Judge Advocate General's Corps, are the attorneys for the Army, and they do a lot more than you would think. My own background, I worked in a lot of different disciplines, and there's this kind of term that they want broadly skilled judge advocates. The idea is to keep funneling people through different fields to make sure that when they're in a senior position, they can, have familiarity across the board. And sometimes that conflicts with having subject matter experts. But, looking back, I wanted to do all criminal law, but I didn't do that. I did a lot of other jobs, and I think that's been really helpful for me, and especially as I look to the AG's office, that's something that's useful. So I did administrative and civil law, reviewing investigations, some environmental issues, FOIA, so public records requests to the military. I did reviews of those for a period of time. I had 5 years where I was a prosecutor or defense counsel, and then my final job, which I don't know how many people know or not, but it was really the most interesting. I usually lead it off with I got to jump out of planes, so I went to airborne school to be part of that unit, but I was the legal advisor to a special forces battalion, and in that role served as sort of a general counsel to the unit, dealing with administrative issues, fiscal law, international law, and of course operational law, including during my deployment.
Wow, it's amazing. I'd love to hear that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love to hear that. Here we are, right in the thick of summertime. There's so much going on. We're distracted by so much. We're busy. We're, frankly, purging from a long winter. But in a couple of weeks, we have a very important date. We have our primaries on August 9th. That's like tomorrow. I mean, this is coming up really fast.
19 days.
Is that what it is?
Not that I'm counting.
19 days. It has. We've been chatting with Bridget and Mike Bishop and her team. They are pushing so hard that this is such an important primary. Frankly, can't really remember maybe a more important one. Respectfully, this is high tide right now. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of movement. We have a lot of office holders that are retiring, not running again. We have new candidates that are coming into the stream here that are looking for support and really want to push for change. And they've all got an idea of what that change should be and why ultimately it's good for their state. It's good for Vermont. There's no excuse not to vote. You've got so many different options to do it.
Right.
Mail-in ballots. Is it too late to request a mail-in ballot? Do we know? It's getting snug.
I think it's getting really close to getting that in, and so if someone needs to vote early, it's probably best to go to the town clerk, do it in person, and early and go. But yeah, I think we're looking at a probably once in a generation change in Vermont politics with an open federal seat.
Yep. With
4 constitutional offices that are going to change over. So Lieutenant Governor, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and Treasurer. There'll be new people in those roles no matter what. Come next year. Yeah. 10 of the 30 Senate seats are open. 41 of the 150 House seats are open, and there's many contested elections, even in the seats where incumbents are there. So, Vermonters who show up and vote this year are going to have a huge say in the trajectory of the state, not just for the next 2 years, but beyond that, assuming the power of incumbency, where people will stay around a little bit longer.
Sure. And I'm just curious what you think the reasoning is behind this. Do you think that the planets just lined up? Do you think this is a residual post-COVID effect? Do you think that maybe it has nothing to do with COVID? Maybe it just has to do with the overall health of our state. I know that you've discussed overall health checks on our state and our county most specifically. But I'm just curious what you think that, and maybe this has nothing to do with COVID or anything else. Maybe this just has to do with culture, our culture, and laws that need to be either completely thrown away and redone, or have the edge sharpened on them, or new laws that need to be put in place, because there's a culture shift here, COVID or not. There are different mental health issues. If you want to go up to 100,000 feet, I mean it really, that's possibly the biggest umbrella is mental health, and everything falls underneath that almost.
Yeah, so starting with the first part of the question, I think COVID had an impact for sure. I think that the remote legislative term and the inability for new candidates to really jump out and campaign during the course of the pandemic meant a lot of incumbents held on for maybe a term more than they were planning to or would have otherwise.
That's right.
We have a lot of people leaving, and I'll just say this: looking at Washington County, we have some really incredible legislators who decided not to run again. Starting with Maxine Grad, the chair of House Judiciary. People can disagree with some of her policies, but incredible leadership on that committee and guiding, a committee that has some very progressive members, some very conservative members, to frequently get to consensus on bills is a testament to real leadership in the legislature. So Maxine Grad moving on is a huge loss for not only our county, but for really the state. And then looking at other parts of Washington County, Kimberly Jessup in Middlesex and East Montpelier was fantastic on judiciary and then on appropriations. Mary Hooper, also a huge influence on appropriations. Warren Kitzmiller was not running and unfortunately recently, passed away. Yep. Warren had, over 20 years of experience in the legislature. We also have Janet Ansell stepping down as chair of appropriations. So we'll have a new rep from, Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield. Tommy Wall's here in Barry City. I think Rob LeClaire is not running again in Barry Town. So there are some really incredible leaders stepping down. Anthony Polina not running for Senate again here in Washington County. So, we're going to have a really new delegation, new faces in our delegation in the county, no matter what. And that, probably more so anywhere else. But with that comes opportunity. There's going to be fresh ideas. There will be fresh perspectives. And, in the end, we're also going to see some new people step up to be committee chairs and leadership in the House and Senate.
Yeah. Comment here, Rory works closely with Barry City Police, and from what I've heard from the boots on the ground, they have appreciated the work that he's been doing. But how do you feel about qualified immunity? That's a discussion that I think you and I had last time you were in here.
Yeah. So I think it's important to note that starting with this, that Vermont has a slightly different version of qualified immunity than what the federal government uses. And there was a decision called the Zullo decision, and the one part of the bill that did come out was attempting, to codify that. And, I think there's a big misconception. A lot of people think qualified immunity prevents the ability to prosecute or pursue a criminal action or pursue administrative action against an officer who's committed misconduct, and that's not really the case. This is about civil recovery and damages. One of the reasons I think qualified immunity or removing it isn't the best approach. There's many approaches I think are more effective and would be more appropriate to enhance officer accountability in the state of Vermont. Removing qualified immunity at this point is not on that list, namely because at the end of the day, it's mainly going to be taxpayers and municipalities that are, holding the bill for litigating the lawsuits or paying out. I think what is better is to make sure that the law enforcement accountability mechanisms we use are directed towards the bad actors themselves, whether that's, again, a criminal prosecution or having a clear and more efficient process to begin decertification. So I'm a proponent. I think we need reform. I think we need to do things that restore public confidence in law enforcement, because there are a lot of people right now who feel that the system is fundamentally broken. And, good officers out there. And good officers out there can't do their jobs under the cloud of a lack of trust. So, there has to be some give and take, I think, in getting through reform. But I don't think ending qualified immunity in Vermont is the best solution to that.
You referred to yourself a little while ago as a Democrat. You dropped the D word. So where is that? How do you feel about that? Because there's so many of us, and even my dad, who's 90 years old, was saying to me a couple of years ago, people need to stop putting politicians in boxes, pre-packaging them up, and then running with your assumptions of who they are, what they stand for, what they're going to do for the overall good, based on whether they are red or blue or D or R. Have you been accused of being too liberal have you been referred to as a Democrat that leans a little bit to the right? How do you feel about all this?
So depending on the circle, some people will say I'm a progressive prosecutor or a progressive Democrat. Others will say I'm just another moderate. I mean, the labels are in the eye of the beholder. I mean, I identify proudly as a Vermont Democrat, and I think a big function of how I operate is being, pragmatic, being transparent, and not being afraid to have conversations with people I disagree with, and also not being afraid to, express why I feel the way I do. But when it comes to core values, looking both nationally and at Vermont, things I really care about, and things that are going on right now. Reproductive liberties are incredibly important, not just to me, but to people in my life. And climate change is something we need, I think, to be doing a lot more on. And environmental quality is important. And what's funny is when you start putting some of these terms out there, like environmental quality. I think you'd be hard-pressed to even find Republicans who want, dirty or disgusting water. No, when you go to Boulder Beach or go to Lake Carmi up north, you want to have clean water. You don't want to have it closed because of cyanobacteria.
Burlington right now.
Yeah, and
out of control.
So there's a lot of things where you could say, like, yeah, of course people want clean air and clean water, but it's, where we get bogged down are, what role does government play in that? How should laws be shaped to do that? And that's where I think the sharp disagreements or the divergence, comes. So sometimes, the real art of being a politician is figuring out how to come up with a message, an approach, or a strategy that can appeal beyond just, I guess, partisan stereotypes or beyond, just beyond the red and blue kind of rhetoric that you hear. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But in some, I've been a lifelong Democrat. I'm happy to be part of the party, and I think right now, looking at leadership in the state, that's the values align with mine, and the vision for what Vermont should be aligns with mine.
You can also be a tough old fella. I mean, how, and you have dropped the hammer pretty hard. You're not a softie.
Well, part of meeting people where they're at and taking a holistic approach to justice is not having a one-size-fits-all approach to anything. And, sometimes there are people who present a significant public safety risk. And, when we start dealing with gun violence or violent crime, we're out of the realm of where we're just dealing with, a purely rehabilitative approach. And, and I, unfortunately, I've been witness to and seen some of the worst things that humans can do to each other right here in Washington County, whether it's child exploitation or homicides. And, we have multiple homicide prosecutions and several attempted homicide prosecutions going right now. And,
sure.
The destruction that people can cause in others' lives is appalling. And those do require those sort of responses. I wouldn't call it, dropping the hammer, but I think it's seeking justice for incredible harm.
Yes. But you also believe in the holistic approach. You also believe in trying to help people and trying to provide them with a solid opportunity to turn their lives around, to take accountability, to do something constructive with their life.
Yeah.
Either before time served or during or after time served.
Yeah, I think that, that really comes to, the most important thing is this, and it's not just, I guess it's a prosecutorial philosophy, but it's also a culture around court of, you need judges and defense counsel who are willing to go along with this and have the, space and give the time to get to know the people you're dealing with in court. And, when you scratch below the surface, there's a lot of times where there's some hidden trauma, there's some unmet need. And ultimately, the biggest risk reduction tool we can apply to anybody, whether it's substance use disorder or whether it's other, mental health issues, stability, having solid housing, having a transportation plan, having a job, and then having, a way to access whatever treatment or providers needed. So that's healthcare, that's, food, basic needs. Generally speaking, you don't go up and down, around Barrie. People who have those, can check those boxes for stability, are generally not ending up in the criminal justice system. So our biggest risk factor continues to be poverty. And unfortunately, we still have, much as we have beautiful infrastructure and things around here, we still have ingrained multi-generational rural poverty that feeds into the cycle of addiction, that
Yes.
feeds into cycles of trauma. And, how to break that is, I wish there was an easy way to do it.
Well, you see it. I mean, Cabot and surrounding communities around Cabot. I mean, you get up into the woods, and you'll see it. Yeah.
Absolutely, and and so I sit on the school board up there, and
Yes.
what I'll emphasize is
In your spare time.
in my spare time. Thankfully, the meetings have been less during the summer, but in any event, that work really informs so much of why I want to run for AG, and it gives me a perspective beyond just what I'm dealing with in court, and the value of education and making sure those services and and the stabilizing element of school hits our highest need kids. I think is one of the ways in which we can break the cycle. Whether it's getting good quality food and meals at school, whether it's getting counseling, and ultimately education is the greatest equalizer. Public education is the greatest equalizer we have in society, that we can at least try to make sure that no matter where you come from, you have the opportunity to go somewhere else.
Absolutely. Amen to that. And having some great teachers who frankly have a place to live close by.
Yeah.
And they're looking for housing right now.
Yeah, I've heard that
Chris Hennessy is
Berry City's having a really
stressed.
difficult time finding places for people to go. And that's another thing too, that it goes beyond what I hopefully will be doing as AG, but we have some real questions about housing stock in Vermont. And the pandemic has led to a lot of second homeowners buying up general housing stock here in Vermont. Burlington is struggling right now with the proliferation of Airbnb units instead of apartments for workers.
Right.
And our workforce crisis is only going to get worse if people don't have a place to live.
Yeah. The Band-Aids is what it seems like. Question here, what can we do about the epidemic of catch and release? Those are two words that we see an awful lot on social media these days. And let's see, the Barry Justice Center is a restorative justice nonprofit organization. Rory has also worked with them as well. And again, from what I've heard, he is also well liked there as well. What is his view on restorative justice? Another question here: can we classify dealing drugs as violent crimes? So I know I just threw a lot at you, but
Sure.
Catch and release. We see those are buzzwords on social media a lot.
Yeah. So I think what's important to understand is that I think the bail reforms of the last few years get blamed a lot for a perception of people coming into the system and then going right back out. What's incredibly important to understand is that Vermont, as all states, has always had a system where cash bail is only supposed to be used to mitigate the risk of flight or non-appearance. And this is something, if you come to an arraignment morning or come hear it, sometimes the judge will impose bail overnight just to make sure someone gets there the next day and then strikes bail and whatnot. And usually the factors you'll hear are lifelong ties to Central Vermont, no prior failures to appear in other cases.
Right.
And, absent that, the court is going to be inclined to release somebody. Now, other conditions of release are imposed to either mitigate the risk of flight or to help public safety. And this is where I think the frustration comes in, that people will continually commit acts over and over again and accumulate. Sometimes we had one, I don't know if Alfonso mentioned the case, he had one gentleman who had accumulated 18 dockets, most of which were, violation of conditions of, violating curfew or being places he wasn't supposed to be or being with people he wasn't supposed to be with. And that was all trying to deter drug activity and drug dealing. So it took to that 18th case until he finally, got held. And so I say all this not to, kind of push blame on the system or on the courts, but we have fundamentally a criminal justice system that emphasizes giving people an opportunity in the community. If there's need for reform, it's probably at what point do we say that public safety or the public interest overrides the individual right to be free. And that's not easy terrain to navigate.
No.
And just as we said, it's a different circumstance, different story for everyone. So my counterpart, Sarah George in Chittenden County, no longer uses or asks for cash bail as an office policy. We have not done that in Washington County, but we try to be very discerning and selective when we go and ask for it, and it's usually only after someone has already missed a major event or not shown up for pretrial conference or just won't come to court. And I think we're cognizant of using that in its constitutionally and legally allowed way. When it comes to conditions, the other caveat I'll tell you is this, that a condition of release violation only counts if someone reports it or an officer sees it. And that's difficult. You don't have eyes and ears everywhere. And, and some defendants are totally willing to strictly abide by those conditions. Others don't. And so there's not a one size fits all. But we try to do the best we can to respond. And then in those really serious cases where there is risk of violence or to public safety, that's where I think our tools become a little more comprehensive to get somebody held or to put public safety first. As
Washington County State's Attorney, as Attorney General, if you win, when you win, how do you feel right now, and what will you do? How will you react to what's going on up at the Northeast Correctional Complex up there? The commissioner is clearly inundated with a staff that is shrinking, smaller, an influx of prisoners, and he's in a predicament where he needs to have his staff now, and this was all over the news, as you know, working 12-hour shifts 5 days a week. A lot of people have very strong opinions about this. Are you concerned about that?
Hugely concerned. And, I think that it's not just corrections. We have a lot of our state services that are at a breaking point. DCF is on there as well. And, I stand with, VSEA and others in advocating for good working conditions and not overburdening them. And putting these correctional officers on 12-hour shifts is not serving the inmates well either. DOC needs major structural reform, not in terms of, I'm not saying that in terms of the management or personnel, but, right now we have, if I'm not mistaken, 6 facilities spread around the state, 3 of which are old legacy facilities that are maybe not efficient. And I'll tell you,
Springfield.
Springfield is a little more modern and it's larger, but Marble Valley, Chittenden Regional, and St. Johnsbury are all facilities that were designed almost 50 years ago and were not intended to be long-term places for people to be. This was an old county and regional correctional system, built and centered around people going and doing short-term sentences and then returning to the community. You think like a DUI 2 of your 60 hours or, a week or whatnot of work, work camp or whatever for a property crime.
Yeah.
They're now, we now have people who are there sometimes for, years, if not longer. COVID has been a huge strain on the correctional system. Well, I think a lot of this boils down to, in terms of, DOC needs, it's a funding issue.
Right.
But running small, decentralized, and inefficient facilities hurts the ability to actually pay people what they are, should be paid, and to retain and, develop the talent to do that. So my hope is that in the long term, we consolidate some of these facilities, expand if necessary, and do that in a humane way to make sure that these facilities actually are conditions in which the inmates have the ability to achieve rehabilitation. I mean, there isn't even really classroom space in some of these facilities to have counseling or to do programming, and that's totally independent of staffing, but it's indicative that our infrastructure has more or less run its course, and we need modern, more efficient facilities where, again, that talent pool can be concentrated, where rehabilitative assets can be embedded, not just on a community or ad hoc basis. But that all costs money and it requires political will. And so long as the debate in Vermont is one of just bed space or privatization, I think we're going to be stuck in a holding pattern. I'd really like to change the conversation to how do we improve conditions for people who are in the system, and how do we make sure that the people working there aren't traumatized by their own work experience.
And with these, a new facility like this, now we can promote this out of state and say, hey, Vermont is a great place to come and work if you want to be a correctional officer. We have a new facility here.
Sure. And, and one thing I'll say too, we still have, inmates that are out of state, contracted to be in a private facility in Mississippi. And there's it's a double-edged sword, and it's sad. And on one hand, I have heard directly from some people who are dealing with post-conviction relief, they would rather stay in Mississippi because the conditions are better than they are in Vermont. And yet that's coming at the same time as saying that they would rather stay there even though they're sacrificing the ability to be visited or be seen by loved ones and family members on a more regular basis. So, that's really telling us that we have to get serious about what our correctional institutions look like. And I think the good people who want to do a good job are there. We just need to make sure that they have the infrastructure and facilities to actually provide meaningful rehabilitation to our incarcerated population.
I think you told me that you're in your 40s.
39.
39.
Don't age me.
I'm 39. All right. Hey, we're still in our 30s. Do you ever feel like, quietly by yourself, oh my God, what the hell is going on with Vermont, with these huge drug busts in these beautiful communities, the beautiful hills of Vermont, which I think in the 70s and 80s we just had this different, and 90s, this different thing in our head of Vermont is this beautiful, just virgin state. It's just, it's so clean. It's so fresh. It's so wonderful. It's the place to go for a vacation. And now we've got these massive drug busts. The one in Washington was the most recent one,
yes,
with the Drug Task Force, where we have SWAT trucks driving by our North Main Street studio here, and a line of police and helicopters. I mean, this is. Do you ever say to yourself, "Man, this is legitimately crazy? What's going on? This is what the hell's going on in Vermont? I mean, this is huge." We just had a comment a little while ago that not to get back too much on drugs, but that it says when it comes to drugs, we've seen some get arrested for selling drugs, released, caught selling again, and then released. At what point are they considered a risk to the community, especially with overdoses and deaths on the rise? Personally, I see no value in coddling drug dealers. The emotions are really high with regard to this. What happened in Washington with this huge bust? I mean, and that's just one. Mm-hmm. That's just one. That has got to have your attention, maybe more than anything else at times.
Well, it's one of those things where I lament that I think we've been able to do some good work in Washington County with the limited resources we have, but it's been difficult to really see a coordinated strategy across the state, and that's COVID impacted that. Law enforcement staffing's impacted that. But to get to the broader point, am I discouraged to that? Sure, but I think it's what we're seeing is the aftermath of underlying problems, and
that's it.
And what I think is interesting, the two Vermont argument gets put out there a lot of rural versus the more developed area, and yet what you see is it's not uncommon now to hear about a drug house or an operation running in a really rural community like Washington. Cabot has had its share of problems. Woodbury, Stannard Mountain. You can look at all these really small communities and say, how could this be happening here? And it's because they're off the beaten path. You can stay out of sight, out of view. But right. It's also indicative of this, that there's a market. And, getting treatment and access in Barre, Montpelier, and Berlin still isn't easy. A lot of people have transportation issues. You have to take a bus to go to the clinic, and then you have to build your day around a time period where you can go get dosing. That gets even more complicated and more difficult when you're trying to drive in from a Cabot or a Marshfield or a Woodbury.
Amen.
And, getting real treatment, not just MAT, but actual counseling pushed into rural enclaves of Vermont has been a real challenge. So hub and spoke, I think, was the great answer 5 years ago. Now I think we need to figure out how to push that further. And, it's not my area of expertise, but having a bus, as funny as that sounds, having a bus that just goes to a private place in some of these rural communities, parks, people can come there, get dosed, do their observation period, and then go about their day, I think would save a lot of time and be easier for people struggling with substance use disorder in rural enclaves to stay on a recovery path. Because frequently, this is harkening back to, the experience of treatment court and seeing,
Sure.
people we care about there, what happens. Sometimes all it takes is just missing a day or two of dosing, and then
The bottom falls out.
yeah, and then it's back to an old pattern, or just the physical illness coming from withdrawals leads to use again of heroin or of fentanyl or what have you. And so recovery is a really tenuous and sometimes rocky process, but impediments like access to healthcare and access to treatment, really can sometimes be insurmountable walls. And we need to do a better job of that if we're going to get serious. And ultimately, I see that, there's going to continue to be this sort of market available, and people who are struggling in Vermont's rural areas. So we can't just have a harm reduction strategy that works in the I-89 corridor. We need one that works for Vermonters wherever they are in the state.
89, 91, 87 over in New York. Yeah, we've got some pretty good arteries that come into Vermont. We need to protect them, big time. Just wrapping up here. You have you've given some strong kudos to your wife recently.
Mm-hmm.
She's been very patient and tolerant of everything that's going on in your life and your family. Yeah. Tell us about her. She actually did better than you. She had a greater GPA than you in law school. What's up with that?
Yeah. So yes, and I'll just go back. So Joanna and I met in 2004 at Vermont Law School in our first year, and we got married in the very beginning of our third year together. Yeah, and I was lucky. She grew up as a military brat. Her dad was in the Air Force, so she lived all over the place in Germany and Korea and Virginia and Colorado Springs. He taught at the Air Force Academy for a while, and then finally Nellis Air Force Base out in Las Vegas. So she was very well traveled before we met, and I think knew what she was getting herself into when we got married. And in law school, she did beat me with GPA. It wasn't a race, but I do joke that. I think in the video I said that her 1L, her first year GPA was significantly higher than mine, and then I caught up.
Yes.
Yeah, so but
she was distracted a little bit after she met you.
I was a bad influence. Let's put it that way. No, but she's incredible in her own right. As you know, she's a small business owner in Cabot. She's the co-owner of Harry's Hardware and the Den, and has really turned.
What a great store, by the way.
Yeah.
Harry's is just. I don't know how old they are, but they're a million years old, and they're amazing.
So she's done an incredible job with that. She's involved, in different community organizations in Cabot, and it's just a solid community member. She shows up, she helps out where she can. She also works. She was teaching before as an environmental law professor through the distance learning program at the law school. She got her master's of law degree when we were still traveling around in the military, and. So she brings a lot to bear, and she still does legal work, and she's the chief operating officer for an architectural and engineering firm.
That was a question I was going to ask. What is she doing now?
Yeah, so at one point she had 5 jobs. Now we're down to 2, thankfully. But and then I guess the third one, of course, is the most important, which is being the core of our family and really kind of guiding where we go. So both of us work really hard, and I think the only way it works is that we communicate, we trust each other, and we have incredible kids who are happy to go along for the ride. And
how are they dealing with all this?
So my older son has escaped. He's been at camp for a big chunk of the summer.
Good.
But my younger son has, he's really going to be the politician. We joke that he's going to be the future mayor of Cabot. There's no mayor, of course.
How old is he?
He's 9.
9.
So he's terrorizing the streets on his bike, and up and down, and having fun with the liberty he has of sometimes us being distracted. But at parades, he is the funniest kid. The first time we did one, he wasn't really that jazzed. It was sort of like, why am I having to do this? It was the Essex Parade. It was pouring rain. It was not, it was an experience. But then after that, we figured out, we got to have him doing something. And on our parades, we don't do. Some people give out candy.
Yeah.
Becca's campaign, she does dog bones for people. David Zuckerman does carrots. Everyone,
Yes, that's right.
Everyone has their, everyone has their shtick that they do
Yeah.
of like, connecting with voters. So actually, Holly had the idea for us of pinwheels.
Okay.
So we give out pinwheels to kids, and then also my favorite is giving out pinwheels to old ladies in hats. They love it. Yeah, so we do pinwheels and then stickers.
Right, that's why I'm seeing that now. Okay, now I'm saying to myself, all right, that's right. I have seen a lot of pictures.
Yes, so
of
get
those.
ready for Berry Heritage. We'll be in full force. But my younger son Cody really has taken to that, and whether it's giving out the stickers or giving out pinwheels, he goes and finds other younger kids, and he's just really cute, and asks if they want one, and so he is running around like a little busy bee, back and forth through the parade route. So that's been good, and I think my older son appreciates it more. But going to different parades, he's been able to meet Lieutenant Governor Gray. He's met Kitty Toll. He's met David Zuckerman. He's met all these people that are huge names in Vermont politics, and and I think that kind of sticks, and he knows it's important, and so I hope that they get something out of it. And my younger son, from all the chants at the parades, he now reminds everybody that the primary is on August 9th, and he said he'll never forget after hearing a different one of the campaigns chanting behind us for 3 miles.
That's fantastic. What's this little guy's name?
Cody.
All right, so we'll see Cody at the Heritage Festival.
Absolutely.
I have to ask you, and it slipped into my mind here. Before I cut you loose here, were you surprised about T.J. Donovan making the announcement of what he was going to do with his life?
Who knows? I mean, it's tough to say what. I think to back up in terms of what he's doing, I mean, it was just a surprise that he wasn't going to run for re-election in the first place.
I
guess it's difficult to assume. Then what does someone do then?
What do they love?
Yeah, what's in public service? What's out there? In terms of jobs, what does he offer? And I think that the one thing I'd say, TJ and I last spoke probably about a month and a half ago, not long after he announced that. And, a lot of our conversation just centered on he had a 16-year run in public service as a state's attorney for Chittenden County, and then 6 years as the attorney general. And, and I feel bad. I mean, sometimes I've been critical of some of the decisions along the way. But, on a basic level, I understand completely how tired you can be of having to be on 24/7, of always having to be aware, alert, and responsive. And public service is tricky, and public service in public safety is even trickier. And law enforcement feels that, prosecutors feel that.
Sure.
And and I know he has young sons that are about the same age as mine, and sacrificing a lot to your career at the expense of your family can just take its toll.
Absolutely. And now he's going to be working for, I think, a gaming company, or?
Yeah, he's going to work for Roblox. And, I made the joke during the debate that my younger son, Cody, again, he definitely told me that he thought it'd be way cooler if I was going to go work for Roblox and it was to be the attorney general. And so.
Final question.
Yeah.
Final question. And it's always a zinger. Thank you for coming in, by the way. You must, in weather like this, you must be just waking up in the morning and thinking, man, can I just wear a T-shirt today and not have to put the tie on? I mean, this is crazy, this heat.
Yeah. What I'll tell you is, this is my costume. I think I made a joke before. This is my costume for when I'm in Barry, Montpelier, or a campaign. If you see me in Cabot, it is almost always a T-shirt, hat, shorts, and
that's filthy dirty.
Yeah. It smells like cows
and sheep.
And sheep.
Yeah.
This is. I think the biggest thing I've been missing from the campaign trail is the ability to get home at the end of the day and just change and go straight and jumping into a pond. And today is definitely going to be a good pond swimming day.
Yes, it is.
Or river or watering hole, wherever.
Hopefully you can stay awake long enough to enjoy that. It doesn't matter what time it is. Get into the pond.
Let me tell you, the cafes and coffee shops around Vermont are glad every time I show up.
Yes, they are. You're a big fan of AR Market. Let's give them a plug, because you're there like daily. I have my rotation. AR Market, Morse Block Deli,
Bueno sometimes for lunch as well, and that's where my main coffee spot here in Barrie. But I'll say AR Market is incredible. They were in support. I had my campaign kickoff event at Pearl Street Pizza.
Yes, you did.
And I want to tell a story, and hopefully someone over there will listen to this. So during yesterday's VPR debate, there was a pretty serious question about office culture at the AG's office and what would change. And Charity Clark gave her answer, and then I went second. And I basically said I think some things need to change, and here's why. And it was it's a very boring answer.
Yeah.
Michaela Lafrac, the host, just said, well, neither of you are talking about, pizza parties for office culture. And she it's time segmented. So she started going into the question. I tried to get in, maybe you can hear in the audio, I was starting to say, because I was going to say, well, we're not talking about pizza parties in Montpelier because everyone knows the best pizzas in Barrie.
Oh, hoo-hoo. There you go.
So I hope that's a good plug for the team over there. And I am really, I'm really sad I didn't get to throw that in there because, hopefully would have given a little bit of levity to a otherwise pretty serious debate.
Well, you just threw it in there now.
Yeah. Well, that's what counts.
Thank you for coming in, my man.
Well, thank you very much. It's good to talk to you and then be here with a hometown audience. And the final thing I just say is the support from you and Raylene and just the support from people in Washington County to do this has been incredibly humbling and amazing. And the final pitch I'd make too is just I think Bridget Grace, who I've endorsed and is in my team, I think she'll be a fantastic leader for this community, and I really hope that she can do and accomplish a lot of the things that I couldn't get done in my 4 years here between rebuilding an office and then COVID. Didn't leave a lot of time to do all the creative work and community connections I think that we ought to be doing. So
well said. High respect. Thank you.
Thank you
so much. We'll see you again soon, and we're rooting for you. We're talking about you on the air, you and Bridget, heavily, and we wish you all best of luck.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your day.